In today's modern web, giving access to an API is essential, whether you're building a brand new AI product or you already have a system in place, but you want to be able to allow your users to build on top of it. There also comes a problem with that. Operations cost different amounts depending on what they do, especially in AI-based products. So if we take a look at this diagram here, where I give an example, this client has two endpoints, a cheapest endpoint and an expensive endpoint. And you can imagine this cheapest endpoint is maybe the cheapest AI model that you have on your platform, and it should only cost 1 unit to get a response from that one. But if you want to access this more expensive endpoint, then maybe it should cost 5 units. But how do you implement that in your API? How do you charge 1 unit based on this endpoint and then maybe one on this endpoint? And you also need to think about users that maybe pay a premium so they get more access. So maybe they have 300 units and a free user maybe only has 20 units. So let's take a look at how we can build that into a Hono API. So here I have a Hono API. It has one endpoint called cheapest and one called expensive. Now this cheapest endpoint calls a friend who tells you the answer, and this one is more like Claude. So we want to be able to charge a single unit for this one. And then for this one, we want to charge 5 units for access. So the first thing that we were going to do is we're actually going to use unkey to provide the API keys, as well as provide the cost and also how many usage a customer can have. So let's navigate to unkey, and then we can talk about how these keys are going to work. So here I have my API. It's called AI API. And what I want to be able to do is use keys that are created here to charge based on the endpoint they hit. So first, let's create an API key here. We're going to give it a prefix. This is not required, but we will. We'll call this demo. And then we want to use this limited use functionality. So I'm going to say this key has 100 uses, and I don't want to refill it. It's just a one-time thing, but I could potentially refill daily or monthly, depending on how you are charging your customers. So let's create this key. So now I have the key here. I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to drop it right into the demo app at the top for now, and we'll come back later for this. So now we have the key that we want to use. We can test out our API. If we were going to create the keys in the API as well, we'd need to create a root key to do that. But from this standpoint, we're ready to go. So we can go back to our code here. And the first thing we need to do is install @unkey/API, and that will give us access to the entire API in TypeScript. So now we have that installed, we're actually ready to use our API. So we can just do verify key, and that comes from this API. Now we have verify key imported, we can create our middleware that we're going to use to verify our keys through these endpoints. So the first thing we want to do is actually verify the key. So we can do const verify with cost, and we'll pass in the cost as a number. And then we'll create middleware, which we'll need to import. We'll do the asynchronous, and we'll pass in C, next. And then we'll handle our operations inside of here. So first, let's import the create middleware, which we can do from Hono Factory. And now inside of here is where we would do our operations. So we're going to assume that the user is going to send this in a header. And we're going to be looking specifically for x-API-key. But of course, this could be anything that you wanted it to be, but we're just going to use this as an example. And then if there is no key, we don't need to do anything. We can just return right away. We can just return c.json, and we'll just return inside of here, error, no API key provided. And we'll set this to 401. Otherwise, we know that they have a key. So now we can actually use unkey to do this. So we can do result, error, and then we can verify key. And we need to pass in a couple of different things here. First, the key itself. Then we need to type remaining. And then we're actually going to pass in the cost, which comes from our verification here. So this could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just going to be a number. By default, it's 1, but because we're going to handle this, we can pass in as many as we want. And then API ID, and then that's going to be the API from Unkey, which we're going to go grab right now. So that's basically the entire thing that's going to power this. So let's go back to our browser, and then in our API here, in our browser, up here is our API ID. So we can grab that and we can go back to here. And we can just drop that right in there. So now we have our verification from Unkey. We just need to handle a few error messages as well as the result that we get back. So let's just make a couple of switch cases here. We'll do one if error. And we'll just throw these in to be good coders. But essentially the idea here is there's going to be a few cases. So for example, too many requests. And we'll just return c.json, error, rate limit, exceeded. We'll do a 429. Now this error is actually Unkey errors. So this is from the Unkey network. So this wouldn't be that the user is already rate limited. This would be for some reason you've been rate limited by our API. So we'll just leave that one in there as an example, and then we'll do the more important one, which is the result. So if the result is not valid, then we can handle the cases. So the way that the cases work essentially is we'll have another switch case here, and there's a variety of result.code. So in here is a bunch of different codes: unauthorized, forbidden, not found, valid, usage exceeded, rate limited, disabled, insufficient permissions, and expired. So the ones we care about is probably disabled, because at that point we know for a fact that there is a key that they're trying to use, but it's been disabled by yourself. So we can just go ahead and handle that case. So we'll just say API key is disabled. And then the next case that we need after that is going to be a case around usage exceeded. Now, usage exceeded is exactly what it sounds like. This would be in a case where the user has used up all their credits already and we don't want them to have any more access. We'll just say API key has exceeded the limits. And we're just going to put these two in here for now. And then we'll just satisfy that for right now. And so the final thing that we actually need to do is to then handle the result. And the way that we're going to handle the result is we're actually going to turn this back. So the way we can do that is do c.set, and we'll do unkey, and then we'll do result. And then we'll do await next. So that's everything there. So this verified cost is now completed, but the problem now is we also need to add in this type into our Hono application so that we can actually handle the types that come back. So up here we can do type unkey result. We can set this to awaited, return type of verify key, and we'll call that result. And then we'll declare module Hono. We'll set this to interface context variable map unkey set to unkey result. And that's it. That's all the stuff that we need to make this work. Now the final step is obviously to wrap these requests into using our API. So all we need to do is attach it to here. So we can just do verify with cost. And we'll also pass that here. And then we add a comma here, and then we pass in how much we want to charge. For this one, we'll just do 1, which is the default, but that's fine. And then for the expensive one, we'll do 5. So now we're ready to test this. So we can go ahead and open up our terminal and run npm run dev. And this is already on 8787. So we can come over here and I'll just paste in a request. But essentially what we're doing is saying curl on a get request with this API key. And we want to hit the cheapest endpoint. And we'll see that we get this result. But that doesn't really help us because we don't actually know what's coming back from unkey. So let's just add in an additional step here where we have a message, but we'll also return verification result. And we'll say c.get.unkey, which is what we put in the top so that we could see it. And we'll also do this on the expensive endpoint. So let's just go ahead and put that here as well. Hit save, and we'll go back to our terminal here, run it again. And as you can see, we're getting valid is true, and we have 97 remaining. It's still enabled, and we're good to go. So now let's try doing the expensive endpoint. And now we've got 92 remaining. So we're charging 5 per. And then if we go and head over to our unkey dashboard, and then we go to our keys here, this key should be used. It's been used 4 times total because I gave it a quick test. We can see that 92 are remaining. And if we go to our logs here, we can actually see that these all passed. And we can actually see what we returned as part of the response body. So you can see the request body here, we asked for 5. And we returned in the response body that we had a remaining of 92. Now, of course, if we go ahead and update this key itself and say this key here, key settings, let's set this to 1 and hit save. This key now has 1 remaining versus the 92 it had before. So if we give this another try, we should see that this changes and we actually get a unsuccessful verification request, and we can look into the log as well. So let's go ahead and run this one more time. You can see API key has exceeded the limits. And then if I go ahead and go to our logs here, and you'll see this one says usage exceeded, and that key no longer can be used. And if we try and use it again, API has exceeded. And even if we put the cheapest endpoint in here, which only costs 1, you can see the key has been, usage limit has been exceeded. So that's just one way of being able to protect your API and also set limits on each endpoint that you can charge based upon how many resources are being used. Of course, on top of this, you can add rate limiting. You can also add different rate limits per organization and all those kinds of things that you might need. Now, if you did make it all the way to the end of the video, please drop it a like, leave us some comments, and I'll see you in the next one.